Ethan Hayes accepted the $300,000 contract to care for the disabled Vivian Reed for 6 months. She shattered a crystal ashtray on his forehead, leaving a scar. "Get out, you piece of trash my father bought to put on a show." The rain was biblical, as if a hole had been torn in the sky. Icy drops hammered the hood of Ethan's cheap windbreaker, the weight of it threatening to nail his thin frame to the slick asphalt. He forced his head up, eyes landing on a massive wrought iron gate. Beyond it, a long private driveway snaked toward a sprawling, brilliantly lit mansion that loomed like a silent beast in the downpour. The intercom buzzed, a cold, electronic chirp. Ethan wiped the rain from his face and leaned toward the small metal grill, his voice deliberately steady. "Hi, it's Ethan Hayes. I have an appointment with Mr. Reed." A moment of silence, drowned out by the storm. Then a soft click, and the heavy gates slid open without a sound. Ethan took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of rain and wet earth. He dragged his battered suitcase behind him, his sneakers splashing through murky puddles with every step. A man in a black suit, his face as rigid as a tombstone, stood waiting under a large umbrella at the front door. "Mr. Hayes." His voice was flat, devoid of any inflection. "Yes, I'm Mr. Reed's assistant, Evans." He gestured slightly. "Please follow me. Mr. Reed and Miss Vivian are waiting in the study." The light inside was sudden and blinding. A colossal crystal chandelier hung from a vaulted ceiling, its light fracturing across the polished marble floor. The opulence was as cold as a morgue. The air smelled sterile, a mixture of industrial-strength cleaner and the faint, expensive sense of aged wood and leather. Ethan's canvas sneakers left a series of damp, apologetic tracks on the pristine floor. He instinctively curled his toes, the wheels of his suitcase echoing in the cavernous space. Evans led him, eyes fixed forward, down a hallway lined with abstract oil paintings, stopping before a heavy, darkwood door. He knocked twice lightly. "Come in," a deep, weary voice called from within. The study was enormous, one entire wall lined with built-in bookshelves groaning with hardcover volumes. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man in a dark gray cashmere sweater. His temples were dusted with silver, and his face held the ingrained authority of a man long accustomed to being in charge, now overlaid with a weariness he couldn't quite hide. This was Robert Reed, head of the Reed Global Conglomerate. His sharp eyes swept over Ethan, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. It was a look of appraisal, like a man judging the value of a commodity. He gave a curt nod of acknowledgement before his gaze shifted to the side of the desk. Ethan's heart dropped. He followed the man's line of sight. By the window, its back to the door, was a sleek, silver wheelchair. A girl sat in it. She was dressed in soft, cream-colored loungewear, and her long, wavy auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders, hiding most of her profile. Outside, the storm raged, battering the trees in the manicured garden. Rain traced jagged paths down the windowpane. She sat perfectly still, a porcelain doll forgotten by the window, her silhouette so fragile it seemed a gust of wind could shatter it. The heat was on, but an impenetrable chill seemed to radiate from her. Robert Reed stood and walked toward his daughter, his voice softened, laced with a careful, placating tone. "Vivian, honey, the new friend I found for you is here." "Friend?" A sharp, derisive laugh cut through the room, cold as poisoned ice. The girl in the wheelchair didn't turn. Her voice was raspy from disuse, sharp with undisguised contempt. "Another dog my dad bought with his money? Is this one supposed to cheer me up, or force-feed me? Or pretend to care about my useless legs?" Each word was a whip cracking in the tense air. A muscle twitched in Robert Reed's jaw. A flicker of pain and helplessness crossed his eyes. He turned to Ethan, holding out a thin plastic card. "Ethan, this is your compensation." His voice regained its businesslike cool. $300,000. Half is on this card, prepaid. The other half will be wired to you in 6 months, regardless of Vivian's progress. Your job is to stay with her, take care of her daily needs, and make sure she does her physical therapy. As long as she's alive, and her mood is manageable. Can you do that? Ethan's gaze fell on the debit card. The cold, invisible number it represented seemed to burn. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool plastic, and took it without hesitation. He slid it deep into the pocket of his faded jeans. "Yes, Mr. Reed," he said, his voice level, betraying nothing. Robert Reed seemed to exhale, a mixture of relief and something more complicated in his eyes as he glanced back at his daughter's rigid back. "Evans will show you to your room. It's the guest room next to Vivian's. Anything you need, just ask him." He paused, lowering his voice. "She has a difficult temperament. She's been through a lot. You'll have to be patient. Patient. Ethan mulled over the word, his eyes drawn again to the cold silhouette in the wheelchair. A difficult temperament was a given, but with $150,000 already in his pocket and another $150 waiting for him, a little patience seemed like a bargain. For a broke college student drowning in his sister's medical bills and worrying about next month's rent, what was a little wounded pride? Dignity was a luxury he couldn't afford. He nodded once, said nothing more, and followed Evans out of the suffocating study, leaving the silent, bitter standoff between father and daughter behind. The next morning, sunlight struggled through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains, casting a pale stripe across the expensive carpet. Ethan stood outside Vivian's closed bedroom door, holding a carefully prepared breakfast tray. Warm milk, a perfectly fried sunny-side-up egg, a few slices of whole wheat toast, and a small bowl of fresh berries. He took a deep breath and knocked 3 times on the solid wood door. "Miss Reed? Breakfast is ready." The room was utterly silent. Ethan waited patiently, then knocked again, a little louder. "Miss Reed? Time for breakfast. We need to start your physical therapy session after. Get out." A hoarse roar tore through the door, the sound of a wounded animal, thick with hatred and despair. "Take your crap and get the hell away from me. Do you hear me?" Ethan's fingers tightened on the tray. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then his voice came out as placid as before, like he was reciting a script. "Mr. Reed's instructions were that your meals and therapy need to be on a regular schedule. The milk will get cold." "Huh." A sharp, cold laugh, followed by the muffled thud of something heavy hitting the door. Crash. The sound of glass shattering. "A schedule? Therapy? Who the hell do you people think you are, playing the hero? You take my dad's money and put on this pathetic act? It's disgusting. Get out. If you don't, I'll make sure you end up in more pieces than that glass." The milk in the glass on the tray sloshed. Ethan glanced down, his face a mask. He didn't try to speak again, nor did he leave. He just stood there, holding the tray, a silent statue outside her door. Minutes ticked by, the air thick and heavy. Maybe 10 minutes passed, maybe 30. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Finally, Ethan moved, his legs stiff. He didn't knock again. He simply turned and walked back downstairs to the kitchen, his steps steady. He poured the now-cold milk down the sink, scraped the egg and toast into the trash, and put the fruit back in the refrigerator. His movements were precise, emotionless. When he was done, he walked to the living room's massive floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the perfectly manicured, lifeless garden. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. The balance on the screen was clear, $150,007. 32. He stared at the number for a long time, until the screen went dark and reflected his own blank face. On his forehead, a small, discreet bandage covered the cut from the crystal ashtray she'd thrown at him yesterday. It throbbed faintly. He pulled at the corner of his mouth, a silent, humorless curve. The air in the physical therapy room was thick with the smells of antiseptic and the dull, heavy scent of chronic illness. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, but it failed to warm the grim space. Vivian sat slumped in a rehabilitation chair, a beautiful doll with its soul removed. Her face was transparently pale, her lips pressed into a stubborn line. She stared blankly at a corner of the ceiling, ignoring the gentle instructions of the professional therapist beside her. The therapist carefully tried to lift her limp leg, bending it just a few degrees. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the room. Vivian's body went rigid, her hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. She whipped her head around, her empty eyes now blazing with fury and agony, locking onto Ethan, who stood nearest to her, as if he were the source of all her pain. "It hurts. Let go. You're hurting me. Get away. All of you. Just get out," she shrieked hysterically, thrashing to get away from the therapist's hands. The therapist, startled, looked helplessly at Ethan. Ethan's expression didn't change. He stepped forward, not touching Vivian, but using his body to shield the therapist from her. He leaned down slightly, his voice low but clear, cutting through her cries. "Physical therapy is supposed to hurt, Miss Reed. If you push through it, your muscles have a chance to recover. Your father is paying us to help you walk again, not to watch you give up." The words were a red-hot needle, jabbing straight in her pride. She snapped her head up, tears and sweat streaking her pale face, her eyes like poisoned daggers aimed straight at him. "Money. It's always money. You disgusting, money-grubbing dogs," she screamed, losing all control. She raised her right hand, the one she could still move with some strength, and raked her nails across the arm Ethan had placed in front of her. The sharp points tore through the thin cotton of his shirt sleeve and dug into his flesh. A sharp sting of pain shot up his arm. Ethan barely flinched, his body remaining a steady barrier. His gaze didn't waver as he met her wild, hate-filled eyes. "You've scratched me, Miss Reed," he stated calmly, as if reporting the weather. "But that doesn't change the fact that you need to complete your therapy. Today's exercises will be finished." His unnerving calm seemed to both infuriate her and drain her of all strength. Like a punctured balloon, she collapsed back into the chair, gasping for air, the anger replaced by silent, racking sobs of pure despair. She stared at her own lifeless legs, her shoulders shaking violently. The therapist looked with awkward sympathy at the bloody scratches on Ethan's arm. Ethan simply gave him a slight nod, signaling for him to continue. The rest of the session proceeded in a suffocating silence, broken only by Vivian's occasional, choked-off whimpers of pain. Ethan stood a single step away from her, a silent guard and an implacable warden. Sweat soaked the back of his shirt, and the cuts on his arm stung with every slight movement, but the expression on his face never changed. The days crawled by, a slow, viscous syrup of silent confrontation and cold commerce. 3 months passed. The high wall Vivian had built around herself with anger and despair was beginning to show tiny, hairline cracks under the relentless, silent pressure of Ethan's daily presence. She no longer screamed and threw things the moment she saw him. Her eyes were still cold, her words still dripped with sarcasm, but at least now, her bedroom door was sometimes left ajar when he arrived with a meal. She started to allow him to stay in the room a little longer. Most of the time, she would just stare out the window while he quietly tidied up or read from one of the worn-out physical therapy textbooks he'd brought, the margins filled with his dense, cramped notes. The change came after a routine therapy session. Vivian, with the therapist's help, was using the parallel bars to practice shifting her weight. She'd done it 1,000 times, each attempt a battle against pain and psychological resistance. This time, as the therapist carefully guided her weight from her left foot to her right, a violent, sudden cramp seized her weak right leg. "Ah!" she cried out, her body instantly losing its balance and pitching sideways toward the hard, cold floor. Panic seized her. Was she going to fall again? Was she going to lie there like a pathetic sack of garbage, waiting for someone to haul her up with pity? Just as she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the familiar impact and humiliation, a steady force caught her. It was Ethan. He was always there, never too close, never too far, a silent shadow. The moment her body listed, he moved with the swiftness of a predator, his arm hooking securely under her arms and around her back, taking the full, dead weight of her fall. Her cheek slammed against his chest. It wasn't broad, but it was incredibly solid. The clean, faint scent of soap and the warm, distinct smell of a young man filled her senses, replacing the sterile odor of the therapy room. Her hands, acting on pure survival instinct, clenched the fabric of his shirt, her knuckles turning white. For a split second, time froze. The expected cold and pain never came. There was only the embrace holding her, unexpectedly warm, surprisingly strong, and deeply reassuring. Vivian's body was rigid. She could hear the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her ear, thump, 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 calm and powerful. She could feel the muscles in his arm tense beneath her, holding her effortlessly. The therapist, also startled, rushed forward to help. "It's okay. You're all right," Ethan's voice rumbled from above her, still in that flat, emotionless tone. He carefully shifted his grip, ensuring she was stable before slowly, almost imperceptibly, releasing her. The entire motion was quick, efficient, with no wasted touch. Once she was steady, Vivian shoved the therapist's supporting hand away as if she'd been burned. She kept her head down, her long hair falling forward to hide the sudden, hot blush on her cheeks. She couldn't look at Ethan. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, not from pain, but from a strange, flustered feeling of being protected, and a sliver of security she refused to acknowledge. I can do it myself," she said, her voice trembling with forced defiance, her hands gripping the parallel bars so tightly they turned white again. The therapist let out a breath of relief, looking at Ethan with a newfound respect. Ethan just silently stepped back to his original position, as if the heart-stopping moment had never happened. He raised a hand and smoothed the wrinkles Vivian's grip had left on his sleeve, a casual gesture, like brushing away a speck of dust. But Vivian knew, when she had grabbed his arm, she felt something through the thin fabric, a texture beneath the cloth on his skin, where they raised, healed scars. She didn't dare to think about it, but the memory of the warmth and the texture lingered on her fingertips, a strange, tingling sensation that wouldn't go away. On a morning in the 5th month, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Vivian's internal clock was precise. She opened her eyes as the first hint of dawn touched the window. The room was quiet, save for the chirping of early birds. After months of grueling therapy under Ethan's relentless supervision, her legs, though still weak, were beginning to lose that hopeless, deadened feeling. A faint, almost imperceptible connection was returning. An impulse, a volatile mix of hope and fear, seized her. She wanted to stand up, right now, not on the parallel bars, not under the watchful eyes of the therapist and Ethan, just by herself, secretly. Once the thought took root, it spread like wildfire. She took a deep breath, her hands clenching the armrests of her wheelchair. She summoned every ounce of her strength, trying to push her upper body up, to transfer her weight to the legs that had been dormant for so long, the legs doctors had all but given up on. She engaged her core, her hips struggling to lift off the cushion. A tearing, acidic pain shot from her lower back down her thighs. Her knees felt like they were filled with lead, her calf muscles trembling uselessly, refusing to obey. In an instant, cold sweat drenched her forehead and the back of her thin pajamas. She was only an inch or two off the seat when her body gave out. She was about to collapse back down, maybe even tip the whole chair over. In that split second, a warm, strong hand planted itself firmly on her lower back. Another arm, solid as a rock, braced her from the front. Ethan was there, having appeared without a sound. He must have just gotten back from his morning classes at the local college. He still carried the cool morning air on him, his dark hair slightly messy from the wind, his breathing a little rushed. "Easy," he said, his voice low and steady in the quiet dawn, carrying a strange, calming power. "Slowly. Use your core. Yes, just like that. Hold it." His hand supported her faltering body while his arm provided a solid anchor. That powerful, unwavering support seemed to flow directly into Vivian's own collapsing frame. She gritted her teeth and, using his strength as a lever, heaved herself up. And then, a miracle. Her feet, the feet that had been handed a death sentence, trembled violently but found purchase on the soft carpet. Her knees knocked together uncontrollably, her calf muscles spasmed, and her entire body swayed like a reed in the wind, held upright only by the solid brace of Ethan's arm. But she was standing, not with equipment, not propped up by others, by her own will, with her own 2 feet on the ground. Vivian's eyes widened, a tsunami of shock and elation crashing over her. She forgot to breathe, forgot the searing pain and the violent shaking. All she could do was stare in disbelief at the tips of her own feet on the carpet. A hot surge rushed to her eyes, and her vision blurred. On instinct, she clutched the arm Ethan held in front of her, grabbing on so tightly her nails dug into his skin, as if it were the only piece of driftwood in a raging sea. Ethan held her steady, feeling the tremors running through her body, feeling the small, cold hand that gripped his arm with all its might. He looked down at the top of her head, at her hair trembling with exertion and emotion, at the pale ankles that were, once again, bearing her weight. A faint ripple, like a single pebble dropped into a frozen lake, disturbed the calm surface of his dark eyes. The moment of standing lasted less than 10 seconds. Vivian's strength evaporated, her legs buckled, and she began to slide downward. Ethan was ready. With a steady arm, he half-carried, half-lowered her gently back into the wheelchair. The second she was seated, Vivian threw her head up. Her face was streaked with tears, flushed with the afterglow of triumph, and filled with a desperate need for confirmation. She forgot the cold, contractual nature of their relationship, forgot her usual armor of thorns and defenses, and looked at him with raw, urgent need. "Did you see that?" Her voice was a disbelieving tremor, her eyes shining. I stood up. I did it myself. Did you see it?" Ethan retracted his arm and straightened up. He looked at her, at the eyes brimming with shock, joy, and fragile hope. He nodded silently. No smile, no effusive praise. Just a calm, almost stark certainty. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet, but it landed like a stone in the turbulent waters of her heart. "I saw. It wasn't a miracle, Miss Reed. You earned it." He turned, walked to the window, and with a sharp tug, pulled back the heavy curtains. Bright, hopeful morning light flooded the room, chasing away the gloom, illuminating the complex expression on Vivian's face, a mixture of tears and a disbelieving smile, and the faint spark that had been rekindled in her eyes. "It's a nice day," Ethan said, his silhouette framed against the light, his voice as steady as ever. "After therapy, if you have the energy, we could go outside." A nascent winter chill had crept into every corner of the city. Outside the therapy room's large windows, the sky was a leaden gray. A few sparse snowflakes drifted down, melting before they hit the ground. Vivian, wearing thick thermal socks, was gripping the parallel bars, flanked by the protective presence of Ethan and the therapist, carefully attempting her third independent step. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead, and her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were focused with an almost religious intensity. Every tiny movement was an epic journey. Just then, Evans appeared at the door, his face a mask of complex, unreadable emotion, shattering the tense quiet of the room. "Miss Vivian," he said, his voice low but clear, "you have a visitor. It's Mr. Carter Vance. He says he just got back from overseas." Clang! The sharp sound of metal hitting metal echoed through the room. Vivian froze as if struck by lightning, her hands slipping from the bars. Her body lost its balance, collapsing heavily to the side. "Careful," the therapist cried, reaching for her. But Ethan was faster. Acting on pure instinct, he lunged forward, his arm catching her upper body securely, preventing the fall. He could feel her trembling violently, her skin shockingly cold. The moment she heard the name, all the color drained from Vivian's face, leaving it a ghostly white. Her eyes were fixed on the doorway, her pupils first flaring with a wild, incredulous joy, then immediately swamped by a deeper confusion, chaos, and a suffocating pain. "Carter!" Her lips trembled, the name a wisp of smoke, barely audible. "Yes, miss. Mr. Vance is downstairs in the living room," Evans confirmed. Vivian sucked in a sharp breath, like a drowning person finally breaking the surface. She paid no attention to her near fall, no attention to Ethan and the therapist still supporting her. She grabbed the arm of her wheelchair, her voice sharp with emotion. "Take me down. Now. Take me downstairs." Ethan looked at her silently. In her eyes, now filled with a chaotic storm of emotion, there was no longer any room for him. He released his hold, stepped back, and ceded control of the wheelchair to Evans, who hurried forward. Evans pushed the wheelchair quickly and smoothly out of the room. Vivian leaned forward, her hands gripping the armrests, her auburn hair swaying with the sudden movement. She was a bow drawn taut, vibrating with urgency and a desperate need to rush toward something. The therapy room fell silent, leaving only the few snowflakes drifting outside the window and the therapist's helpless sigh. Ethan stood where he was, watching the wheelchair disappear down the hall, his face still a blank canvas. He looked down at the hand that had just held Vivian. The palm seemed to retain the phantom feeling of her violent trembling and the icy cold of her skin. He slowly clenched his fist, the knuckles making a soft, popping sound. The living room was warm, the air thick with the rich aroma of a fine cigar, a stark contrast to the lingering scent of antiseptic on Vivian. The massive crystal chandelier cast a brilliant but cold light. When Evans wheeled her into the center of the room, she immediately saw him, a tall figure standing with his back to her, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window. A perfectly tailored dark gray cashmere coat defined his broad shoulders and narrow waist. Even from behind, he radiated an aura of elite, sophisticated charm. Hearing the wheelchair, the man turned slowly. It was Carter Vance. The handsome face that had starred in so many of Vivian's teenage dreams was now sharper, more defined by time. Deep-set eyes, a strong nose, and a smile that was the perfect blend of tenderness and concern. His gaze fell upon Vivian, lingering on the blanket covering her legs. His brow furrowed instantly, his eyes filling with a thick, undeniable ache. "And devotion? Vivi." His voice was deep and magnetic, with just the right amount of gravel, as if holding back a wave of emotion. He crossed the room in a few long strides and knelt before her wheelchair, placing himself at her level, a posture of deliberate reverence. "Vivi, I'm back." He reached out, as if to touch her hand, then paused mid-air with careful restraint. "I'm so sorry that you had to go through all this pain, alone, for so long." Vivian had frozen the moment he knelt. 5 years. 5 whole years. No word, no contact. He had vanished when she was at her most desperate, her most broken. All the resentment, the confusion, the years of self-doubt and gut-wrenching pain, it all came crashing down at the sight of his apologetic, pained expression, at the sound of his simple, "I'm so sorry." The dam broke. Hot tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She bit her lip, trying to stifle a sob, but her shoulders shook uncontrollably. 1,000 questions were lodged in her throat, but all that came out was a choked, wounded cry. "Where? Where did you go? Why? Why did you leave then? Why didn't you send a single message?" Carter's face filled with a deep, convincing anguish. He looked down, then met her eyes again, his own gaze now filled with a heart-wrenching sincerity. "Vivi, you have every right to blame me, to hate me," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "Back then, when I heard about your accident, my world fell apart, seeing you in that hospital bed, so pale, so fragile. And the doctors said your legs." He shook his head, as if the memory was too painful. "I hated myself for being so helpless. I hated that I couldn't do anything for you. The medical options here. At the time, I felt so hopeless." He took a deep breath, his eyes becoming firm and intense, locking onto her tear-streaked face. "So I left. I didn't say goodbye because I couldn't bear to look you in the eye. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to leave, and even more afraid that you would see how powerless I was. I went to Switzerland, Vivi. I worked myself to the bone, got into the top neurological institute, and studied under the world's leading surgeons and rehabilitation specialists. For 5 years. 5 years. I never let up for a second. The only thing that got me through was one single thought. I had to learn from the best, and I had to come back and heal you myself. I had to help you stand again, just like before." This time, he reached out and firmly, gently, took her cold, trembling hand. His palm was warm and strong. "Vivi, please forgive me for leaving without a word. Forgive my selfishness. I wanted so badly to give you a future." His low voice was hypnotic, every word a hammer blow against her weakened defenses. "I'm back now, with the best technology and with hope. This time, let me stay with you, take care of you, until you've fully recovered." "Okay." The living room was silent, save for Vivian's choked sobs and the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. The crystal light illuminated Carter's face, a perfect portrait of devotion and determination. Vivian stared at him, her vision blurred by tears, her heart beating wildly. 5 years of bitterness and resentment evaporated in the face of his grand, romantic confession. A wave of dizzying relief and overwhelming gratitude washed over her. She squeezed his hand tightly and nodded, the tears flowing even faster. It was as if a drowning woman had finally found a life raft. A lost ship had finally spotted a lighthouse. Standing in the shadows of the living room, Ethan was a forgotten piece of the scenery. He watched the touching reunion unfold, watched Vivian's face light up with tear-streaked hope and dependence. His own handsome face remained expressionless, as calm and deep as a well. But the hand in his pocket was clenched into a fist, the nails digging deep into his palm. The atmosphere at dinner was strange and silent. The long dining table was laden with exquisite dishes, but the only sound were the faint clinks of silverware against bone china. Robert Reed sat at the head of the table, his expression dark, his sharp eyes flicking from Carter, who was solicitously serving Vivian, to Ethan, who sat quietly at the far end, eating without looking up. Finally, his gaze settled on his daughter. Her face was still pale, but it glowed with a new, vibrant light, and his frown deepened. Vivian was clearly still reeling from the afternoon's emotional reunion. She ate little, her head down most of the time, occasionally stealing a quick glance at Carter, who murmured comforting words beside her. A faint blush would rise on her cheeks, and her fingers would nervously twist her napkin. Dinner ended quickly. Vivian seemed anxious to escape the oppressive atmosphere and to be alone with the long-lost Carter. She murmured a quiet, "Dad, I'm tired," and motioned for Evans to wheel her back to her room. Only Robert Reed and Ethan remained in the living room as the staff silently cleared the table. Mr. Reed leaned back into a large leather sofa, a lit cigar held between his fingers, the smoke curling lazily into the air. His sharp gaze, like a spotlight, fell on Ethan, who stood nearby, his face as unreadable as ever. "Ethan, Mr. Reed's voice was low, carrying the weight of his authority. "This Carter, what's your take on him?" Ethan met his employer's scrutinizing gaze, his own expression calm. He paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice consistently level, devoid of any personal opinion. "Mr. Reed, I am an employee you hired to manage Miss Reed's physical therapy and daily care. My duties are limited to the terms of my contract." He added, "Her personal relationships are outside the scope of my responsibilities, and it's not my place to comment." The answer was professional, airtight, and almost coldly detached. It respected his employer's privacy while drawing a clear line between himself and the family's private affairs. Robert Reed stared at him for a long moment, his expression complex. It held scrutiny, curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of disappointment. Finally, he exhaled a slow ring of smoke and waved a hand dismissively. "All right, you can go get some rest." Ethan gave a slight nod and turned, walking steadily out of the grand room that reeked of expensive cigars and silent conflict. Late that night, the mansion was asleep. Dim wall sconces cast long, wavering shadows down the hallway. Vivian's bedroom door was pushed open gently. She hadn't turned on the main lights, relying on the soft glow of a small crystal lamp on her vanity. She sat in her wheelchair, her back to the door. In front of her was a small, deep blue velvet jewelry box. It was open and empty. Hearing the door, she turned around slowly. The emotional, vulnerable flush from the afternoon was gone, replaced by a cool calm and a resolute distance. Her gaze cut through the dim light and found the silent figure in the doorway. "Ethan, you're here," she said, her voice soft, lacking warmth. Ethan didn't step inside, remaining in the threshold between light and shadow, a silent silhouette. Vivian picked up an envelope from the vanity. It was thin, but it clearly held something of substance. She maneuvered her wheelchair over to Ethan and held it out to him. "Take it." Her tone was clipped, carrying a note of finality. "This is $150,000. The remainder of your payment, paid in advance, plus a bonus." Ethan's eyes fell on the envelope, but he didn't immediately take it. "My legs are recovering much faster than expected," Vivian said, avoiding his eyes, her gaze fixed on her own blanket-covered knees. Her voice was a flat recitation. "The doctors say at this rate, it's only a matter of time before I can walk again. And now, Carter is back." Her voice faltered almost imperceptibly at the name, as if she were drawing strength from it. "He studied at the top rehabilitation institute for 5 years. He'll be taking over my care from now on." She finally looked up at him. The lamplight danced in her eyes, but reflected no warmth, only an icy distance and an almost charitable certainty. "So, Ethan, you did a good job. My father's money wasn't wasted." A tiny, dismissive smile touched her lips, the look of someone concluding a transaction. "But your job is finished. Carter will be more professional, and he'll care more. You can leave first thing in the morning." The crystal chandelier in the living room seemed to spin overhead, casting 1,000 cold, brilliant spots of light. Ethan's gaze finally moved from the empty blue jewelry box to the envelope Vivian was holding out. A thin piece of paper that seemed to carry the weight of an ending. He was silent. Time seemed to stretch, to congeal. The only sounds in the room were Vivian's slightly hurried breathing and the distant whisper of the wind outside. After a few seconds, Ethan slowly raised his hand. His movement was steady, without a tremor. His fingertips touched the smooth surface of the envelope, which felt strangely cool. He took it, his fingers closing around the light, yet heavy finality. "Okay," he said. His voice was as still as a stagnant pond, utterly devoid of emotion. No questions, no pleading, not even a flicker of surprise. The curtness of his reply caught Vivian off guard, and the speech she had prepared, phrases like, "Use the money to build a good life for yourself," and "Thank you for your service," died in her throat. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She could only watch as Ethan, holding the envelope, turned and walked toward the door without the slightest hesitation. His back was straight, his pace even. He never looked back. The door clicked shut, the sound barely audible, sealing the two of them in their separate worlds. Vivian remained in her wheelchair, her arm still outstretched, for a long time. The light from the small crystal lamp seemed to dim. A vast, inexplicable emptiness, like a cold tide, washed over her, drowning the smug relief she had felt just moments before. She instinctively raised a hand to her chest. It felt as if that silently closing door had just slammed shut on her heart. At 3 a.m, the city slept. Ethan's belongings were pathetically few. One worn-out suitcase and a stuffed hiking backpack were the only traces of his brief stay in the lavish mansion. He walked silently through the empty, cavernous hallways and down the sweeping staircase. The massive living room was pitch black, except for the faint, perpetual glow of the city lights filtering through the windows, casting hazy shadows on the floor. He went to the foyer and put on his shoes in the dim light, not bothering to turn on a lamp. His eyes swept over the cold, opulent space one last time without a hint of sentimentality. He pulled the door open, and a blast of frigid, early winter air rushed in, ruffling his hair. Outside, the night was thick as ink. An Uber was waiting quietly at the curb, its headlights cutting 2 weak beams through the darkness. Ethan dragged his suitcase down the steps, the cold wind wrapping around his thin frame. The driver was a quiet, middle-aged man who got out to help him with the trunk. "Grand Central, please." Ethan's voice was clear and calm in the cold night. "You got it." The black sedan slid silently onto the empty pre-dawn streets, leaving the brilliantly lit but soulless mansion and everyone in it behind in the suffocating darkness. Streetlights flashed across Ethan's face as the city flew by. He leaned back and closed his eyes, inhaling the mix of exhaust fumes and cold air. Then he took out his phone. The screen's glow was harsh in the dark. He opened his banking app and logged in. His thumb moved quickly across the screen. A few seconds later, a new text notification popped up. Chase Bank, a direct deposit of $150,000 was made to your account, ending in XXXX on deck. Free at 3:15 a.m. Your new balance is $302,189.57. Ethan's eyes lingered on the long string of numbers. The cold light of the screen reflected in his equally cold eyes. There was no joy, no excitement, only a vast, profound sense of finality and the deep exhaustion of a heavy burden finally set down. He pulled at the corner of his mouth in a faint, silent curve. It could have been a sneer, or it could have been relief. He turned off the screen, leaned his head against the cool vinyl headrest, and closed his eyes. It was finally over. Dawn broke as the Amtrak Acela train shot like a silver arrow through the fog blanketing the northeast, racing toward the warmer south. Ethan sat by the window, watching the landscape blur by, the gray and brown of winter slowly giving way to hints of green. The insulated glass muted the roar of the wind, leaving the cabin warm and quiet. He took out his phone again. This time, he wasn't looking at his bank balance. He was on Zillow. His fingers scrolled through listings, his eyes scanning for keywords. Oceanfront, private yard, quiet turnkey. His fingers stopped on a picture. It was a small, two-story whitewashed house, nestled between the hills and the sea. It had clean lines, large glass windows, and a small wooden deck overlooking the water. On the edge of the deck, a few potted plants soaked up the morning sun. Just beyond was the endless blue of the Atlantic, waves gently crashing against the rocks below. In the corner of the photo, a small wooden sign swayed in the breeze. Painted on it in deep blue were 3 words, Serenity Point Inn. Ethan's gaze rested on the sign for a moment. Then, he tapped the contact agent button. 1 month later, a small coastal town in South Carolina. The sea breeze, thick with the smell of salt and humidity, drifted across the small deck of the Serenity Point Inn. The wicker furniture was spotless. Ethan had just seen off a couple who had been staying for the weekend and was walking back to the reception desk. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown local number. He answered casually. "Hello, Serenity Point Inn." There was a 2-second pause, then a frantic, breathless female voice, trembling with rage. "Ethan, it's me. Vivian. Where are you? That bastard. Carter. He's a liar, a complete and total fraud. He's not some genius medical student. He was a failure overseas, and he's married. He came back to scam my father. I threw him out. Ethan, I need you. You're the only one who can help me. Where are you? Tell me where you are." Ethan held the phone, listening silently. The voice on the other end was shrill, chaotic, and filled with the fury and despair of betrayal, the helplessness of a drowning person. He could picture her perfectly, sitting in her wheelchair, face pale, eyes wild, a cornered animal. He waited until her voice grew hoarse from crying and shouting. Then he spoke. His voice traveled through the line, as calm and unmoving as a stone dropped into a deep well. "Miss Reed," he said, using the formal address. "First, congratulations on exposing a con artist and protecting your interests." The other end fell silent, except for a choked, incredulous gasp. Ethan's voice continued, steady and unwavering, carrying a cold, impassable distance. "Second, regarding your ongoing rehabilitation, I suggest you consult a more reputable medical facility or hire a licensed physical therapist. There are plenty of patient, qualified professionals in the world. With your family's resources, finding someone better and more professional than me should not be difficult." He paused, hearing the sharp, broken intake of breath on the other end. Finally, Ethan's gaze drifted past the deck to the vast, sun-dappled ocean. A trace of profound weariness entered his voice. "My contract ended a long time ago. The payment was rendered. The services were complete. We're square. Your life has nothing to do with me. Please don't call again." Before she could respond, he decisively hit the end call button. Beep, beep, beep. The dial tone echoed. Ethan placed his phone on the wooden reception desk. The screen went dark. He picked up a clean cloth and began to slowly, methodically wipe down the polished surface of the desk. The sun, streaming through the glass door, cast a small, quiet shadow beneath his lowered lashes. The sea breeze was still gentle, carrying the salty scent of freedom. The dial tone was a series of icy needles, stabbing not just Vivian's eardrums, but her shattered heart. She gripped her phone, her knuckles white, her body trembling uncontrollably in the large wheelchair. A tidal wave of humiliation washed over her, completely eclipsing the anger and hurt of being deceived. How could he be so calm, so cold, as if he were discussing a piece of ancient history that had nothing to do with him? We're square. Your life has nothing to do with me. Ethan's flat, emotionless words replayed in her mind, each one a poisoned icicle, shattering her desperate assumptions of being needed, of being able to win him back. A violent impulse seized her. A raw, agonizing scream tore from her throat, a sound of utter breakdown and impotent rage. She raised her arm and, with all her strength, hurled her brand-new, expensive smartphone at the polished wall. Crack! The phone exploded on impact, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass that flew like crystalline shrapnel across the room. The loud noise brought Evans and a maid running. They burst in to find the wreckage on the floor, and Vivian in her wheelchair, breathing in ragged gasps like a wounded animal, her face streaming with tears, her eyes terrifyingly empty. Miss Vivian. She didn't hear them. She stared at the glittering fragments of her phone, the pieces of her last fragile connection to him, her chest heaving. After a long moment, she slowly lifted her head. Her face was still wet, but her eyes were hollow, her voice a rough rasp. Go, find me a new physical therapist. The best one. The most expensive. Now, in the days that followed, the Reed Mansion became a revolving door for physical therapists. One after another, so-called top experts and gold medal therapists were brought in on exorbitant retainers. They arrived in crisp white coats, carrying expensive equipment, their faces fixed in professional, gentle smiles, spouting the same generic words of encouragement. Vivian sat in the rehab chair like a soulless marionette. She no longer screamed or cursed. She didn't even cry. She just watched them with those terrifyingly empty eyes. Just relax, Miss Reed. That's it. We'll take it slow. Excellent. Your form is much better today. Hold that position. Pain is normal. Just breathe through it. It'll pass. Their movements were textbook perfect, their methods precise. They supported her arm, bent her knee, guided her through the standard exercises. Every touch was mediated by a sterile glove. Every instruction delivered with a carefully calibrated professional distance. Their eyes were focused, but only on the angle of her limbs, on the data flashing on a nearby monitor. Their gaze never truly met the dead stillness in her eyes. None of them, when a spasm of pain made her body instinctively recoil, used their own body as an unyielding brace to catch her fall. None of them, when she was curled into a ball late at night, tormented by leg cramps, biting her lip raw to keep from making a sound, appeared silently and swiftly to soothe the searing pain with warm hands and just the right amount of pressure. And none of them, on a quiet morning when she was struggling to stand on her own, about to fall, appeared like a silent shadow to offer a single, indisputable point of support that felt strong enough to hold up the world. These new therapists all did their jobs correctly. They were professional, by the book, and polite. They were simply completing a job, a very well-paid one. They arrived on schedule, performed their tasks meticulously, and left on time. Their concern was listed on an invoice. Their patience came with a hefty price tag. Vivian cooperated like a puppet. She could feel her knees slowly regaining some sensation, her calf muscles twitching faintly under electric stimulation. Her physical metrics were improving, but her heart was sinking into a bottomless, icy abyss, growing colder and emptier by the day. She started suffering from terrible insomnia. In the darkness, memories she had tried so hard to bury would surge to the surface. She remembered splashing hot soup on his arm, and how he had silently wiped it off and gone to get her another bowl. She remembered screaming the ugliest insults at him, and how he had simply stood a few feet away, waiting for her to finish before handing her a glass of warm water. She remembered the focused line of his profile, illuminated by a desk lamp, as he pored over those thick, heavily annotated textbooks on neurorehabilitation. She remembered the morning she first stood on her own, and how he had stood against the light and said, calmly, I saw. It wasn't a miracle, Miss Reed. You earned it. The memories were so vivid, so heavy, they crushed the air from her lungs, pressing down on her hollow heart. After another therapy session, the new therapist packed up his equipment and left with a professional smile. The vast room was empty again, just Vivian and the encroaching twilight outside. She sat in her wheelchair, motionless, staring at her feet in their specialized orthopedic shoes. The last rays of the setting sun stretched long, distorted shadows across the floor. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. It was her father. Vivian stared at the name on the screen for a long time before mechanically answering. Hello, Dad. Her voice was dry and hoarse. There was a pause on the other end, then Robert Reed's tired voice, laced with a cautious, probing tone. Vivian? The therapy. How is a new person? Vivian's blank gaze remained fixed on the last sliver of sun sinking below the horizon. Her voice was as faint as a wisp of smoke. They're all the same. Dad, they're all the same. Another silence. Then a heavy sigh. The one who wasn't the same. You're the one who sent him away. Vivi, all I can give you is money. I can only find you professionals. But a person's heart. I can't buy that. Vivian's hand tightened around the phone. Her father's words were a dull knife, slowly and painfully slicing open the truth she had been desperately avoiding. A heart? Dad, what are you talking about? He was just doing a job for money. Her voice shot up, sharp with the panic of being exposed. Robert Reed was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was calm with a terrible clarity. Someone who is just doing a job for money leaves the second you tell them to get out. They don't look back. He paused, each word a hammer blow against Vivian's taut nerves. Someone who is just doing a job for money doesn't calmly congratulate you when you throw them over for someone else. Vivian, think about it. Was he really just an employee to you? Or have you fallen for him, and you're just too proud to admit it? Boom. Her father's words were a thunderclap, exploding in the chaotic landscape of her heart. Fallen for him? Fallen for Ethan Hayes? That silent, stoic guy who only cared about money? The broke college student who endured all her abuse and then calmly walked away with his check? The man who coldly rejected her when she came crawling back? Impossible. Vivian slammed the phone down as if it had burned her. It slipped from her trembling hand and fell with a soft thud onto the carpet. A suffocating sense of absurdity and the raw shame of having her deepest denial ripped away left her gasping for air. She sat in her wheelchair, her chest heaving, her face flushing red, then draining to a deathly white. Her father's words echoed in her ears like a curse. Someone who is just doing a job leaves the second you tell them to get out. Someone who is just doing a job doesn't calmly congratulate you. Have you fallen for him? And you're just too proud to admit it. No, it wasn't true. How could she fall for someone like that? Someone with no pride, who only saw her as a paycheck. The man she loved, the man she had always loved, was someone like Carter. Handsome, dazzling, full of passion, and a liar. The realization was a shard of ice driven straight into her heart. The agony, followed by a tidal wave of despair, left her feeling cold to the bone. She doubled over, her hands grabbing her own lifeless legs, her nails digging into her flesh, as if she could use physical pain to mask the bloody, gaping wound that had just been exposed in her soul. A choked, animalistic whimper escaped her throat. So, that vast, gnawing emptiness she felt when she sent him away. It wasn't because she'd lost a physical therapist. So, that cold revulsion she felt toward all the new therapists. It wasn't because of their technique. So, those haunting memories of his every silent glance, every solid, unwavering touch. It wasn't because of resentment. It was because she was in love with him. This belated, deeply ironic, and agonizing realization was like molten lava, obliterating all her self-deception and fragile pride. She collapsed in her wheelchair, her body shaking from the violent, emotional storm. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't tears of self-pity or anger. They were tears of overwhelming regret and a terrifying new fear, the fear of loss. She finally understood. Far, far too late. Deep winter in the coastal town. The air was crisp and clean with the scent of sea salt. Bright sunlight bathed the small deck of the Serenity Point Inn. Ethan had just seen off a group of long-term guests and was hosing down the deck. The clear water sluiced across the wooden planks, glittering in the sun. A discreet but luxurious black SUV pulled up silently on the stone path outside the inn's small yard. The door slid open. Evans got out first, efficiently retrieving a folded wheelchair from the back, snapping it open, and pushing it to the rear passenger door. The door opened. Vivian was wearing a thick white cashmere coat, a scarf obscuring half her face. All that was visible were her eyes, weary from the long journey, but shining with an intense, nervous light. With Evans's help, she moved awkwardly from the car to the wheelchair. From the moment she got out, her gaze was locked on the figure on the deck holding the hose. Ethan seemed to sense something. He turned off the water, straightened up, and turned around. Across the small gate and a distance of a few yards, their eyes met. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs, threatening to break free. She took a deep, shaky breath of the cold, salty air, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. With every ounce of strength she possessed, she began to guide the wheelchair forward toward him. Her movements were clumsy, the wheels bumping slightly on the uneven stone path. Ethan stood perfectly still, watching her approach. His face was unreadable. No surprise, no disgust, just the calm of a man watching a stranger walk by. The wheelchair finally came to a halt a few feet from the edge of the deck. Vivian tilted her head up. The weak winter sun lit her face, revealing the anxiety, hope, and desperate courage in her eyes. She licked her dry lips, her voice a near imperceptible tremor, but impossibly clear. Ethan, I can stand now. She paused, gathering her strength as if for a momentous declaration. This time, I came here on my own. I want to start over, not as an employer and an employee, but as Vivian and Ethan. Can we? Her eyes were fixed on him, filled with a cautious, fragile hope, like a drowning person looking at their last chance for rescue. Ethan's gaze dropped from her tense face to her hands, which were gripping the armrest so tightly the knuckles were white. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. It was a faint, almost imperceptible curve, something between politeness and dismissal. He raised his hands and began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the sharp, distinct sounds echoed in the quiet yard, jarring against the whisper of the sea breeze. "Congratulations, Miss Reed," he said. His voice was mild, but it was coated in a layer of cold, impenetrable civility. "I'm glad to see your recovery is going so well." He lowered his hands, his calm gaze meeting her face. The light in her eyes froze, then began to dim rapidly. He continued, his words clear and detached. "But what does that have to do with me?" The blood drained from Vivian's face. She swayed in her wheelchair, as if his casual, dismissive question had been a physical slap. All her anxiety, her hope, her desperate, last-ditch courage, it all shattered against the calm, indifferent wall of his eyes. A crushing wave of humiliation and despair washed over her. She opened her mouth, but her throat was tight, and no sound came out. A broken, watery film quickly veiled her auburn eyes as she stared at him, her expression a mask of disbelieving pain and utter rejection. But Ethan was no longer looking at her. As if he had just concluded a piece of necessary but trivial business, he turned his back, picked up the hose, and twisted the nozzle. Whoosh! The stream of clear water shot out again, washing away the fine grains of sand left by the last guests. The sound of the rushing water filled the small yard, drowning out the sigh of the wind and the choked, suppressed sob that came from the girl in the wheelchair. Vivian sat there, a statue suddenly drained of all life. Evan stood outside the gate, watching in silence, making no move to approach. The sun was still bright, the sea breeze still gentle, but an invisible, icy barrier had just descended over the Serenity Point Inn. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, Vivian slowly, stiffly, raised a hand to the controls of her wheelchair. The motor hummed softly as it turned, pointing back toward the black SUV. Silently, she glided away. Her back was ramrod straight, a posture of tragic, defiant pride that couldn't hide the profound fragility underneath. The black SUV started up again, pulling away from the stone path and merging into the traffic on the coastal highway, eventually disappearing from view. Ethan turned off the water. The rushing sound stopped. The yard was quiet again, filled only by the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks. He stood for a moment, his gaze fixed on the spot where the car had vanished. The faint, dismissive smile was gone, replaced by a deep, unreadable calm. He bent down, picked up a broom, and began to meticulously sweep the wet sand into a small pile. His movements were precise, as if the brief, brutal encounter had never happened. Life moved on with the steady, predictable rhythm of the tides. Vivian did not reappear, but the peace of the Serenity Point Inn was broken in a different way. Every morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the deck, a familiar DoorDash driver would pull up. He would take a beautifully packaged breakfast out of his thermal bag and leave it at the reception desk. One day, it was artisanal pastries from the best bakery in town. The next, gourmet coffee and fresh squeezed orange juice. Another, a complex egg benedict. A small, handwritten card was always attached, the script elegant but with a hint of awkwardness for the owner. The croissants from La Bellevue are supposed to be the best in the state. Thought you might like to try something different. This coffee is from a local roaster. I saw you eating instant ramen on the deck yesterday. You'll ruin your stomach. You have to eat breakfast. Ethan would look at the meticulously chosen meals and the carefully crafted, yet clumsy, notes. Then he would silently place them in the small mini-fridge under the counter. He never ate a single bite. After a week, the fridge was crammed with untouched gourmet food. The DoorDash driver's cheerful demeanor faded into a hesitant silence, and finally, just a quiet drop-off and retreat. Besides the food, extravagant bouquets of flowers began to arrive. Sometimes fiery red roses, other times elegant champagne ones, or pristine white lilies. The cards bore the same handwriting. Passed a flower shop and thought this color matched the beautiful weather today. Are red roses too tacky? Maybe white tomorrow. Never mind. What kind of flowers do you like? Ethan would calmly unwrap the bouquets and stick them, unceremoniously, into a large glass vase in the corner that he normally used for spare umbrellas. He never trimmed the stems or changed the water. He simply let them bloom, wilt, and die, their petals falling to the floor. When he cleaned, he would sweep the dead leaves and stems into a dustpan and dump them in the trash. These silent, awkward offerings were like stones thrown into a bottomless well. After the initial splash, there was no echo, until one particularly sunny afternoon. Ethan was in the backyard hanging freshly washed white sheets on the line. The sea breeze billowed through them like giant sails, the clean scent of laundry detergent and sunshine filling the air. He heard an unusual commotion from the front yard, mixed with a few hushed gasps. Frowning, he set down his clothespins and walked through the inn's small lobby toward the front. The sight that met his eyes made him stop dead in his tracks. Vivian was standing at the entrance to the yard. She wasn't in her wheelchair. She wasn't even using a cane. She was standing, completely unaided, in a simple light blue sundress, the hem fluttering in the breeze. Her whole body was trembling, her face flushed with the enormous effort, a sheen of sweat on her forehead. Her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, her knuckles white. It was clear that simply remaining upright was a monumental battle. But her gaze was like a burning flame, cutting through the small crowd of onlookers, across the few yards of space, and locking onto Ethan with searing, perfect accuracy. There was no pleading in her eyes, no weakness. Only the fiery, desperate glow of a final, all-or-nothing gamble. As if she was trying to pour all the struggle of the past few months, all her clumsy attempts, all her humiliation, and all her current, monumental resolve into that single, unwavering stare. The other guests watched, whispering amongst themselves. Ethan stood in the shade of the doorway, looking at the trembling, stubbornly upright figure in the sun, at the wildfire burning in her eyes. The mask of calm on his face finally, almost imperceptibly, cracked. Another 2 months slid by in a silent stalemate. The serenity point seemed to have returned to normal. After her dramatic, standing appeal, Vivian had attempted no new grand gestures. The glass vase on the counter, once cleared of wilted flowers, remained empty. The mini-fridge was no longer a graveyard for cold breakfasts. Just as Ethan was beginning to think the silent siege was finally over, on a warm spring evening, with a gentle breeze drifting across the deck, Vivian's figure appeared again at the yard gate. This time, she wasn't attempting to stand unaided, nor was she in her wheelchair. She was walking. With a single, sleekly designed cane, she was moving, step by agonizing step, into the small yard. Her movements were still unsteady. Each step looked incredibly heavy, her body swaying slightly, relying on her arm and the cane to maintain balance. Sweat quickly beaded on her forehead, and her breathing grew ragged with the effort. But she didn't stop. Her gaze, from the moment she entered the yard, was fixed on Ethan, who was standing behind the reception desk, seemingly organizing receipts. And so, under the curious eyes of the few remaining guests, she walked. Leaning on her cane, step by slow, deliberate, impossibly determined step, she made her way toward the reception desk. The soft thud of the cane and her own labored breathing were the only sounds in the yard. She stopped a few feet from the desk. She didn't speak. She just stood there, catching her breath, and raised a hand to the object she had been carefully cradling in her other arm. It was a huge, exquisite bouquet of flowers. Lush, champagne-colored roses were nestled among sprigs of green eucalyptus, their petals dewy and vibrant in the soft evening light. Vivian held the massive bouquet with both hands. Her arms, and the body supported by the cane, trembled slightly from the exertion. Her cheeks were flushed from the walk and from her own surging emotions. Her bangs were damp with sweat, clinging to her skin. She lifted her head. Her auburn eyes were shockingly bright, as if they had caught all the light of the setting sun. They were filled with undisguised nervousness and an almost sacred hope. She took a deep breath, as if it took all the strength she had left to find her voice. It came out with a slight tremor, but it was perfectly clear, echoing in the now silent yard. Ethan, flowers. For you. Her gaze was locked on him, a final, desperate courage burning in her eyes, as if to ask, this time, do you see me? Do you see what I'm willing to do? The handful of guests and the young woman working the desk with Ethan held their breath, their eyes darting between the girl with the bouquet and the silent man behind the counter. Ethan stopped what he was doing. He slowly raised his head, his gaze landing on Vivian's face. The golden light of the sunset outlined her defiant profile. Sweat trickled down her temple. The fire in her eyes was hot enough to burn him. He was silent. Time seemed to freeze again. The gentle sea breeze carried the sweet, rich scent of the roses. Just as the light in Vivian's eyes began to waver from the prolonged silence, threatening to extinguish, Ethan moved. He didn't reach for the huge bouquet, the symbol of her ardent, desperate heart. He walked calmly out from behind the reception desk. His steps were steady as he approached her, stopping so close he could see the nervous flutter of her eyelashes. Then, under the astonished gaze of everyone present, in the molten gold of the setting sun, reflected in Vivian's suddenly wide, disbelieving eyes, Ethan slowly, deliberately, knelt down on one knee. He looked up, his eyes as deep and calm as the ocean, perfectly mirroring Vivian's stunned, frozen face. From his pocket, he pulled out a small, square, deep blue velvet box. Click! The box sprang open. A simple but brilliant diamond ring rested on the black velvet lining, catching the last rays of the sun, refracting a cold, dazzling light. Ethan's voice came, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the sigh of the waves and the whisper of the wind, carrying a strange, unwavering calm. Vivian Reed, he said, using her full name, his voice holding no excitement, no sweetness, only the finality of a settled account. Marry me. He paused, his serene gaze meeting her completely petrified, thought-emptied eyes, and added with stark clarity, each word a brand. $20,000 a month. Paid daily.